male decision, and she would not be even consulted on this issue. In some parts of Arabia, it was considered it was considered shameful to have too many daughters, because you have to remember this was a tribal society. So the more males you have in the household, in the tribe, the stronger your tribe is, the more honorable your family is considered to be. And the less males you have and the more daughters you have in the household means that you're weaker in this tribal culture, and you do not have the same respect as others who might have more males. So what would happen was that if a person had a lot of daughters, he would end up taking some of his newborn daughters and burying them alive in the desert. So they would just take their newborn daughter, and Allah talks about this in the Qur'an and criticizes the Quraysh and stops them, prohibits this practice of female infanticide, where you would take your daughter in the middle of the desert and bury her alive because you feel ashamed of having too many daughters. And obviously there were no rights for this newborn. And Allah actually in the Qur'an, He says, what are you going to do on the day of judgment when this female who was buried alive, who was killed by you for no reason at all, this innocent baby, what are you going to do on the day of judgment when this innocent baby grabs you by the collar and asks you, for what crime did you kill me? And then you will have to answer before God for this crime. So you can imagine what kind of a society and what kind of times are we talking about here. Women were considered to be subhuman and possessions. They were considered to be like property or possessions of men who were primarily supposed to serve man. That's why they were there. They were there to serve men and to satisfy their lusts and desires, which is unfortunately the same today in the West and in many other countries around the world, where the Hollywood culture is taking root or is being firmly rooted in our psyche, where women are now seen as objects of desire. I remember taking a course at WVU some years ago on women in films. And one of the things they taught us in that course is that most of the films and the media, the portrayal of women depends on the male desires. So they would dress the women in a way which attracts men. They would put makeup on her the way it attracts men. They would choose women who are skinny, who look a certain way, because they want to arouse the man's desire and bring them to the cinema, bring them to the media. So, it is very unfortunate that even after all these years of women's rights, women today are no different in some ways, in some aspects of life, than the women in pre-Islamic Arabia. They were objects of desire then, and unfortunately, they're objects of desire now. And now, the problem is that they're doing it willingly. Back then, they used to do it, they used to be coerced into doing these things. But now, in the name of freedom, many women, they're exposing themselves, they are happy to be objects of desire, and they have given away their dignity and their humanity. And this is one of the reasons in Islam there is a lot of emphasis on the dressing for men and women, because the dress is supposed to give you dignity. The dress is supposed to bring respect to you. You shouldn't be viewed for your body. You shouldn't be viewed for the way you look. You should be viewed for your personality. Women should be viewed for their character, not for their looks and their body, which, once again, we're going to talk about in female rights when we talk about women in Islam later on. But with all of this darkness, there were a few exceptions. Some outstanding women in Arabia were able to rise above this classification, this demonization of women, and they would rise above this, and they had established businesses, or they had established a certain influence and respect in Arabian society. These were rare. These were usually belonging to the high elite class in Arabia, and we have examples of Khadija, who we are going to talk about in a few episodes, the first wife of Muhammad, peace be upon her. She was an outstanding woman. She was a wealthy woman. She had a lot of influence in Arabian society. She ran her own independent business, and she was an intellectual woman. and also the wife of Abu Sufyan. Remember, Abu Sufyan was the leader of the Quraysh. His wife Hind was also one of the powerful women in Arabia. So there were a few examples, but if you look at the general case, the women were suffering, the women were in a destitute state. Let's also talk now about slavery. Slavery was common in Arabia, but the difference was that it was not the slavery which we know of in the West. In the West, we experienced a racial slavery, where the white man would enslave the black man, or the white man would enslave the colored person. In Arabia, slavery was not racial. It was not race-oriented. It was based on the one who loses and the one who wins. So all the people who ended up losing in a battle would be taken as slaves, regardless of their color, regardless of their ethnicity. So we have in Arabia black slaves. We have in Arabia white slaves. We have in Arabia red slaves. We have in Arabia all kinds of ethnicities when it comes to slavery. So even though slavery was common, but it was not racially oriented. It was more oriented towards the victory and the loss in the battlefield. Slaves were bought and sold in markets, once again like commodities, much like women. These slaves were an embarrassed part of the society. The master had unlimited rights over the slave, including his life. If the master wanted to take the life of the slave, it was considered to be normal in Arabian society that the master would kill him, and nobody would raise an eyebrow. Slaves were disciplined through severe beatings, lashings, and torture. And inshallah, when we start talking about the early movement of Islam and how many of these slaves came to Islam, how harshly they were treated by their pagan masters, ordering them to return to the idol worshipping faith, and on their refusal they were taken out in the desert, they were lashed, they were beaten, boulders were placed on their chests in the scorching heat of Mecca, and all kinds of torture they had to endure from the pagan Arabs when they accepted Islam. The slaves did have the option of freeing themselves in Arabia, so it was not like a lifelong slavery. You can free yourself if you're a slave by financially ransoming yourself. So if you have some relatives or some help financially, you can free yourself by paying a certain amount to your master, or by fulfilling extraordinary wishes for your master. For example, there was a slave, he got his freedom by planting and cultivating a certain number of trees for his master. So his master told him, if you can plant for me 100 date palm trees until they are good, they have grown and they are strong, then I'm going to free you. So this person, he did that and he got his freedom. So you can see some differences from the racially oriented Western slavery, which was lifelong, which was based on race, as compared to that in Arabia, even though slavery was common and it had really negative repercussions on society, especially if you were part of the slave trade. But at the same time, it was not based on race, and you had some way of getting out of it. The slaves, however, were not allowed to eat the same food as the masters. They were not given the same clothes as the masters. They were not given any respect, and they would be ordered to do anything according to the wishes of the master. And once again, Islam, it changed things around. It changed things around, first of all, by encouraging brotherhood between the masters and the slaves. So if you have a slave in Islam in those early days, then you have to feed your slave the same as you feed yourself, and you have to clothe your slave as you clothe yourself. So basically, Islam changed this relationship between a master-slave to a brotherly relation, where you're actually taking care of your slave at house. And then later on, slowly, Islam was able to completely end this slavery in Arabia over the years. And we're going to talk about slavery in Islam and how Islam ended slavery in Arabia, which was one of its greatest contributions to the world at that time. So let's finally now talk about the Arabic language, because this is very important, as we said in our last episode, when it comes to the Holy Qur'an.